Hi, this is Paul. Yesterday I did a ThinkClub debate. I was unprepared for how much of a debate it was going to be, but I think in the end we had a good conversation, and it's always fun talking to Adam. And one of the things that Adam struggles with is why I am resistant to naturalism, or as Adam says, materialism. Now, I think Adam should probably sit down and do a lot of watching of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, because I think part of what John Vervaeke's series affords us is a really nice walk-through lesson in the issues that are at hand and the science that is underway. Now, again, me being a Christian minister, recommending this series will sound strange to some people. Some Christians will say you shouldn't do that because Vervaeke is not a Christian. Other people will say, well, you shouldn't do that because I can't sit through this many hours of video. Well, I'd ask you, how many hours of video are you sitting through now? In John's channel, if you walk through it, you can learn something. Agree or disagree, he lays a lot of the issues out on the table. Now, Adam thought that I strawmanned Bret Weinstein in my response, my commentary video on the unbelievable conversation between Bret Weinstein and Alistair McGrath. And I don't think I strawmanned Bret Weinstein at all. I think there are some serious difficulties with his position philosophically, and I want to highlight them. Now, next week, Adam and I are going to sit down and watch that video together, virtually together, via the computer. We'll see how long that takes. Adam is prone to do very long streams with PSA Sitch sometimes, but I told him I can't go 6 hours. But Adam and I are going to do that next week, and we'll see what that happens. Adam and I have arrived at certain impasses with respect to our understanding of some things, and that's natural, and that's okay. My hope is that the impasse doesn't just sit there and produce frustration, but perhaps we can proceed forward with the spirit of finesse and learn something together. But I wanted to highlight some things, what I think are some issues with Bret's project, and let's take it from there. Now, one of the things that I noted with my conversation with Jeff Quackenbush, with my continued study of John Vervaeke's project, and with what Alistair McGrath didn't really get Bret to concede, which is that in every case there's this sense that we need a new religion that's not a religion. And one of the issues about religion that many of these people have is that religion appeals to quote-unquote supernatural causes, let's say. Now, Alistair McGrath in the unbelievable conversation, being the good scholar that he is, noted that we didn't really have the term supernatural until the 11th century. And that's important to think about. And one of the overarching projects on my channel that I've been doing is, I think we need to deconstruct this idea of the supernatural. I think John Vervaeke is offering a lot of helpful terminology and language and science to give us some higher definition perspective on this term. And that isn't necessarily a big win for Christian tribe or the atheist tribe, but I think John is just improving the conversation if we can recognize, again, how he is upping the resolution on all of this. Now, if you're following John's work, I think you should really take a look at Mary Kohan. She has started a channel. She only has 118 subscribers now. Mary has been on my channel a few times, and I remember the first time I did a conversation with her, Julian jumped into the comments and said, "Oh, that's the smart lady from the comments section." Well, Mary is a treasure, and she's got a project of laying out Pope Benedict's book on an introduction to Christianity. Now, I'm not a Roman Catholic. Many people have recommended that book to me. I haven't read it, so I'm really looking forward to Mary walking it through. But Mary is also, I think, she did a video on John Vervaeke's project, which I thought was one of the most honest and mature commentaries I've seen on John from a Christian perspective. And so I very much welcome Mary's voice to this. And again, I think John's work is a must watch in this, because his concept of relevance realization, especially how it intersects with Darwin, I think is very important for people who are especially coming at this using Darwin as some way to prove a lack of intentionality or design in this world that we live in. That's a critical nexus point. And what I think John Vervaeke does, together with the Metaphysical Club, a book that Jordan Peterson has recommended, it helps clean up some assumptions about what Darwin did and didn't assert. Now, in my conversation with Jeff Quackenbush, which got a lot of reaction, which I knew it would, the most surprising thing that he said in that conversation was, he said we needed a spiritual solution. And this surprised me, coming from an atheist, because spiritual is a deeply problematic word in the secular frame that we can't live without. And it gets into a lot of the Barfieldian questions of spirit and wind, because when atheists talk about a spiritual solution, what they're talking about is a communal, motivational something that will flow through society and sort of align all kinds of discordant factors towards achieving a particular goal. And the difficulty that we have is many of the challenges we face currently are not immediate threats to us. And we tend to respond quickly and well in an organized fashion to what the community sees as an immediate threat. But when the threats are further away, we lose our focus and our relevance realization machinery kicks in, and we're relevant to the things that are most immediate. And I think Bret Weinstein would agree with me that this is a big part of the problem that we face today. Now, you can see some of it. I usually over the weekend watch the Sunday morning. The only network TV I continue to watch is some of the commentary on the Sunday morning news shows, and I'm often disappointed. That's probably the best word, by the fact that, 1 week, okay, we've had some shootings, and, well, is this going to be the thing? We have to keep our focus on this. And the next week, their focus is not on it. If their focus is on anything, it's on the upcoming presidential elections. And there are good reasons for market-based news to focus on something like that. There's a hierarchy, after all, and the president sits at the top of the national hierarchy, and in some ways the world hierarchies, and everything is focused on the president or the presidency. And so there's a reason that these things take the shape that they do. But also, when watching a presidential campaign, you can notice the movement of the zeitgeist go through. Now, the capacity of the news organs to get this right is, we should be highly skeptical of that, especially given what we saw in the 2016 presidential elections. They all pretty much got it wrong. And that has to be kept in mind when we watch them today, if we imagine that they are accurate prognosticators about the future. But what this doesn't displace is this idea, which is still present in our culture, that what we lack is a spiritual solution. And I think this is part of the reason why, even among the atheists or the non-theists, that we're looking for a religion, because religion is in fact the type of thing that guides us as a community towards, I made the comparison, and I'm going to keep making it. I've thought a lot, what is the relationship between politics and religion? And I deal with this often as a pastor because I have to walk this line. And it was in my adult Sunday school class a few weeks ago that it really dawned on me that politics is about the now and religion is about the always. And so in terms of facing the kinds of threats we face as a society, which are in fact significant but might not be immediate, and the challenge to marshal a society towards the problems of the not near term but far term, we quite reasonably look to religion to get there. But this gets us into the definition of what a religion is. I guess I put this later in my slideshow. Where is that slide? Oh, okay. Well, and some of this comes into play with my conversation with Adam, because Adam loves Jonathan Haidt. And so often when I'm talking to atheists, when they use the word religion, they're using this really lousy definition that religion involves supernatural beings or agents, that's in the definition of religion. And I think, okay, well, many historical religions have that, just because this natural-supernatural distinction hasn't been around for the foundation of most religions in the world today. And in fact, I think the natural-supernatural distinction is in fact problematic for in a number of ways. It's a useful terminology because it highlights something, but I think we need to continue to deconstruct it, because I don't think we are sharp on what exactly that distinction means. But if you look at Emile Durkheim, you can very easily see how Jonathan Haidt defines religion, and in fact how Adam defines religion. Religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices related to sacred things. Now I think we're adding some elements there that Reveille will talk about sacredness, and in some future videos I want to get into the intersectionality between some of the woke religion dynamics we see in our culture right now and this question of sacredness. And I think this actually has everything to do with the frame problem, because you need something to look through, even to look about. And as C.S. Lewis noted, he believes in Christianity not because of what necessarily he sees in it, but because he sees everything through it. And I think that's a very early articulation of the frame problem. And C.S. Lewis sees the frame problem in the middle of the 20th century, and that's, I think, why he's so helpful to many of us today. Now, I know Adam, every time he hears me mention C.S. Lewis, he checks out because he read C.S. Lewis and he wasn't impressed. Fine, but I'm going to still mention it because I think actually C.S. Lewis continues to have a lot to contribute today. So, Durkheim and his definition of religion. Basically, okay, so religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. That is to say, things set apart and forbidden, beliefs and practices that unite a single community called a church, or maybe called something else besides a church, but a community, and all those who adhere to them. The believer who has another definition in this slide. A religion is a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things. And again, I think sacredness has everything to do with the frame problem. That is to say, things set apart and surrounded by prohibitions. Now, I think part of what we see in the power of religion is, in fact, because over the last 50, 70 years, a number of people have raised issues with some of the prohibitions within traditional religions of really all sorts. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam get pointed to in our society partly because those are the religions often with the highest, the most that we know about. Buddhism and Hinduism are often sort of embraced casually, but I think partly because a certain form of Buddhism, usually stripped of a lot of its prohibitions, or at least a lot of its moral prohibitions, has become fashionable, as Jonathan Peugeot says, sort of California Buddhism in our culture. So I'm comfortable in terms of beginning with Durkheim's definition of religion in this conversation. Okay, let's go back to where we were. But now, all of these projects, I've been doing a fair amount of thinking about this, partly because of my engagement with John Vervaeke's work and his desire for us to find a religion that isn't, to find a new religion. And again, hearing this from Jeff and hearing this from Bret Weinstein, even if he won't necessarily admit it, I think this is going to be a very challenging thing to make up on the spot. And as Bret Weinstein noted, well, many of our challenges, although not feeling immediate, are coming closer and closer to us. And the speed at which we develop religions, I understand Bret Weinstein's skepticism that we can develop one fast enough to actually deal with the challenges that we face. Because I think religions have a number of key aspects to them as opposed to ideologies, which Jordan Peterson calls crippled religions. One of these aspects I call thread durability. Now, people will look at Christianity and say, oh, it's so divided, there are so many churches, there are all these problems with it. Yes, that's true. But part of that is a feature and not a bug, because what you need within religion is the ability to have differences while not lose the thread. And in fact, part of the reason why I think heresy and orthodoxy sort of develop together is that's sort of how we keep the thread and how we define the thread and find articulations such as propositional articulations that are helpful over long periods of time in order to maintain the narrative thread of the religion. If you listen to my conversation with Adam, you'll note that he tried to define religion as a series of laws, and I disagreed with him because I think religion is more a narrative within which a person can live, and it's that way that religions have now this scalability piece across the 4 P's of knowing that John Vervaeke talks about. Participatory knowing, procedural knowing, perspectival knowing, and propositional knowing. And all those 4 ways of knowing need to be present in a religion. And a lot of the difficulty that people are expressing with respect to the relationship between Christianity and propositional knowing, a lot of those criticisms are well-founded because I think a truly mature Christian knows their religion and knows their master and knows their narrative in all 4 ways. Procedural knowing in the New Testament. All judgment texts in the New Testament are according to what people have done. Doing is about procedure. Perspectival knowing and participatory knowing. This very much has to do with trust and motivation. One of my definitions about what a Christian is. I didn't know any of the Vervaeke stuff when I made this up, but it fits in very well because one of my definitions is a Christian is someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves. That's perspectival and it's participatory. And it also then gets into the procedure and then, of course, the propositional. And I'm a confessional Christian, so I'm not willing to discard the propositional, but the propositional has to be within the context of the other 3 P's. Now, so Christianity has to be thread durable in order to, a religion has to be thread durable. And part of why I think Bret Weinstein began to sound totalitarian, as many others do in this space, is because they don't understand the dynamics of thread durability. What that means is there needs to be disagreement, but that disagreement needs to be bounded by behaviors. Now, a lot of this has developed in the West with respect to post-Protestant reformational learnings that we don't kill each other or burn each other at the stake over theology. That was an important thing for the West to learn when it came to the relationship between religion and power. Now remember, politics is about the now and religion is about the always. Religions need to be scalable. They need to be scalable across IQs. Before I got here, there was a Down syndrome man who made profession of faith in our church, and that means that he joined the church formally. And for years after, now how that happens in our denomination is someone comes before the church board or the church council and gives a verbal profession of their faith. And then the council decides whether or not to include that person in formal official membership of the church. Now, years after this Down syndrome man professed his faith, I heard council members talking about that. And they were so moved and impressed at this Down syndrome man whose obviously his capacity for propositional articulation was limited, but the council was so impressed at the sincerity of this Down syndrome man's faith. Now, religions have a capacity to scale across IQs, which means that it should be something that is satisfying for the likes of C.S. Lewis and satisfying for the likes of someone with Down syndrome. Part of the difficulty that I find with a lot of the admonitions for a new religion today is that that's going to be difficult. But traditional religions have in fact managed to do this in many ways. And I think Christianity, in some, obviously I'm biased, but in some ways the best. C.S. Lewis actually points this out in his conversations with Van Auken, which are recorded in A Severe Mercy, which is a book that Job in the Discord server, the pastor of the Discord server, is now reading. Because one of the things C.S. Lewis, as after he became a theist, he wanted to know sort of in what branch of theism he should practice. And the last two candidates, as C.S. Lewis was working it through, was Hinduism or Christianity. And he eventually decided on Christianity because he saw the most commonality across the scale in terms of what the brilliant man, think of someone like C.S. Lewis or Pope Benedict or Thomas Aquinas, any of these brilliant people, and the simple faith of a person with a very low IQ and perhaps some kind of obvious mental impairment. But I've seen that as a pastor again and again and again. It is often the case that I see very simple people, sometimes very disrupted people, even homeless people sometimes, exhibit faith that shames the brightest and the most successful in people of status in the community. Religions need to scale in this way unless you're going to jump into some sort of eugenicist system by which we're going to cull all the low IQ people out of the world. They also needs to spread across cultures. Different people from different cultural groups need to be able to settle in and make the religion their own. And again, I think Christianity has been very successful on this score over many years and many cultures all around the world. Northrop Frye notes in his lectures that you can find on the University of Toronto website, his lectures on the Old Testament, that Christianity is, unlike Islam, unlike Judaism, unlike Hinduism, is a religion that begins in translation, that the New Testament church reads the Hebrew scriptures in Greek. So, there are issues with that, but already the religion shows a capacity to jump cultural lines. And in fact, the center of mass of the religion, you can find maps of this on the internet, have moved around the world. And that's part of the reason Christianity has been so successful in human culture. Christianity also has to cut across the classes. We saw this in the early Roman Empire, where it was not just the slaves who adopted Christianity, but it was the wealthy elites. We see this in Chinese culture now, that Christianity is not only infiltrating the masses of nameless people in the huge populations of China, but the elites and the educated are also embracing Christianity in China. Crazy Asian Wedding, I think that was a movie that I saw a couple of years ago. If you note in the beginning of the movie, the wealthy mother of the young man who's going to marry the Chinese American girl of low status, she's having a Bible study with her friends. Now, again, a religion needs to do this, and Bret Weinstein's Fear Matrix, there's not enough time for that to happen. Religions need to be mythological, and they need to operate thoroughly and well in the symbolic world. Now, I think part of the reason that Jonathan Peugeot's channel is so valuable is because it's likely true that the symbolic world, or these archetypes that Jung and others and Jordan Peterson have been so adept at noticing and naming and propagating, this is closer to our machine code. It is a language beneath the articulated language that we have. And so any spiritual solution to the problems that we face today must be termed in mythological language. And it's Jordan Peterson's capacity to handle a lot of these issues mythologically that I think are part of the reason for his success and popularity. It also needs to be historical. It needs to tie past and future together. It needs to transcend politics. It needs to be politically nimble. And I personally get frustrated when I hear Christians saying, well, this is the Christian political perspective. And I think, well, politics is about the now. Religion is about the always. Those two different speeds. Certainly, politics is always downstream from religion, but the complexity of the now, especially when you get into legal systems and frameworks, should give us a little bit of humility and a little bit of generosity when it comes to how different Christians apply politics differently. And I think this has been skewed partly by the media representation of the relationship between politics and religion in America, whereas it's true that Karl Rove employed a certain demographic of white evangelicals to really launch the George W. Bush campaign. We should also remember that the most Christian demographic, ethnic, racial demographic in America today are African Americans who are solid Democratic voters. And many people who have listened to me have noted that, well, in many ways, I grew up in the middle of the African American community, and so my politics have been shaped by that community. Remember, politics is about the now, and religion is about the always, and if you keep that in mind, that should help modulate the relationship between these two things. Religions also must take institutional form, because nothing changes without individuals, but nothing lasts without institutions. And so the practices, the types of the dogmas, all of these things must begin embodied in institutions if religions are going to be able to create the kind of spiritual solutions to problems that are not simply imminent. I gotta grab my water bottle. Now this is a meme, so if you're listening on the audio, you probably have to check onto the YouTube for this. But this is a meme that Job posted in the Bridges of Meming in our Discord server, where it's the Scooby Doo meme with unveiling the ghost at the end of the show, and with the ghost mask on over it, it says Bret's respect for life, and I forget the blonde dude's name. He pulls off the ghost mask, and underneath it says religion. And this is, I think, where Alistair McGrath sort of backed Bret down into at the edge of the video, that Bret, you're really advocating to found a new religion. That's what you're doing. And Bret kind of hemmed and hawed. He didn't want to get tagged with that religious thing because he's probably uncomfortable with the term. Now, Sam's Garden in the YouTube section on the commentary of that video called Sam's said Sam had flippant teleology, and I think I told him I'm going to steal that idea, and I didn't tell him I'm going to put it in a video too. Flippant teleology by Sam's Garden in the YouTube section. Well, why? Well, why is it flippant? It's basically teleological smuggling. There's a telos here that's operating in Bret's system. Now, it's a good telos, and I think it's fundamentally a Christian telos. Or, if I dare use that label that Jeff hates so much, a Judeo-Christian telos to recognize Bret's Judaism and his relationship with that community and that tradition. And that telos is a respect for human life and seeing the image of God in that. Now, I did a conversation yesterday with Christopher Mastro Pietro, and he had some really interesting ideas that I think he said it so well, and it was just it was just so beautifully put. If you haven't watched that video, you should watch it. Christopher is, I can see why he and John work so well together, because Christopher really has a gift with language, and he can put things together. So that young man could be a preacher. You know, watch out for him in the future. He's really very gifted with language. But in a certain degree, human beings are the symbol of God. He studied semiotic. Now this gets into the book of Colossians in the first chapter, where the Greek says that Jesus is the icon of the invisible God. And so this is all stuff that's clearly downstream from Christianity. But one of the things that I think Bret has to own is that he simply smuggles his religion under the cover of atheism. He smuggles the values, he smuggles the telos, and says, well, these things are self-evident. Yeah, they're self-evident in American society in the 21st century, but that hardly makes them the products of evolution. Now, I already talked about the definition of religion, so I want to run through some models of creation, and maybe creation isn't the right word there, but some definitions here. Now, naturalism, I understand to be that the universe has unfolded through a series of closed cause and effect relations. We should name Alvin Plantinga, because Alvin Plantinga has done a lot of good work in this, and I haven't used a lot of Alvin Plantinga in my videos, and maybe I should. Alvin Plantinga is a son of the Christian Reformed Church. He was a philosopher at Calvin College, went on to Notre Dame, written a number of important books on and delves into the matters of whether Darwinism as a belief system is inconsistent. So naturalism says that the universe has unfolded through a series of closed cause and effect relations, yielding the minds and matter we are, and live within, completely apart from any intentionality or planned outcomes. This is the blindness that Darwinianism says we live within. Now, again, as C.S. Lewis begins his book Miracles, I think this is a part of naturalism, that in fact the cause and effect relationships are closed. And in fact, science is built on the assertion that these relationships are closed. And even though we might not know it all, that is the reliability that is built into these laws of physics that we talk about as being the basis for everything and the foundation for a disbelief in so-called supernaturalism. Supernaturalism is probably that the laws of physics cannot be broken by an event. That is basically what I hear from most who are saying that I can't go along with religion because I can't go along with supernaturalism. These laws are set, they're fixed, and the system of cause and effect is closed. X cause, no matter how complicated, will yield Y result every time, because the system is closed. And if it yields a different result, it's because there was some other cause that we weren't aware of, but we can become aware of it theoretically at some point in time. This is the vision of naturalism. The only true agency is the Big Bang. Okay, and this sort of goes along with Jordan Peterson's, give me one miracle and I'll explain the rest. After the Big Bang, everything was set into motion, and here we are today. This is the system behind Sam Harris's skepticism in free will. Now, we might have the experience of free will, we might have the illusion of free will, and that even might be considered a feature and not a bug, because it gives us meaning. Meaning itself, then, is a feature and not a bug, but it's always only an illusory experience of meaning, something that is an adaptive advantage to keep us alive. And so this kind of naturalism, I think, is Sam Harris's naturalism. Now, there are other features that we can do. We can take psychedelics, we can meditate, we can do all of that to encourage ourselves and give us meaning, to keep us alive. But fundamentally, we are locked within a closed cause and effect system, all launched at the Big Bang, package including the laws of nature. That is what I understand as naturalism. Now, the downside of that is obviously that it is a closed system, that our belief that our ideas of will, free will, true agency are actually illusory, and we're really just working out this enormously complicated script. And even our admonitions back and forth are to encourage each other. Cultures that have meaning do better. Cultures that don't do worse. So even now, in an atheistic way, Jordan Peterson's admonition, Adam always says I lose him when I start talking supernatural to him. It just turns him off. And so if Adam and I were to be on Tinder, he'd say turn-ons, Jonathan Haidt. Turn-offs, supernatural talk. Talk supernatural to me, baby. But true agency was the Big Bang, but this is all the whole show, as C.S. Lewis says. Now, preceding naturalism was a theistic stage that Charles Taylor talks about called Providential Deism. And if you haven't read Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, well, you're not alone, because it's a really big book and it's not much easier to read than Maps of Meaning. But it's a good book to read. Well, before that was Providential Deism. And this is, in a sense, what Darwin defeated and asserted what was wrong. And again, Jordan Peterson's recommendation of the Metaphysical Club, I agree with. It's a great book. Providential Deism says the universe has unfolded through a series of closed cause and effect reactions, yielding the minds and matter we are, and live within according to a plan built into its launch and progresses according to its predetermined outcome. Now, this is the Christianity that Adam asserts is compatible with naturalism. And in many ways, when Adam gets frustrated with me, it's because I'm not a deist, because what Adam is looking for is allies, theistic allies, because he thinks Christianity actually got a lot right, even though there is no supernatural God. So Adam is an atheist and not an anti-theist. And so Adam wants Christians to fall in line and stop complaining about the naturalist and just come in alignment with them. Certain forms of Calvinism might be compatible with this providential deism, that we're in a closed system, everything is predetermined, and from the beginning of time, it's all been set in motion. And if you look at the relationship between some articulations of Calvinism and the rise of deism, the timing looks not coincidental. And for this reason, I'm comfortable being a compatibilist theologically when it comes to the Bible, because I'll say human beings have real agency and God has ordained the future. And I think Tim Keller articulates that really well. And I've played some Tim Keller clips in past videos on this score. So to that degree, theologically, I'm a compatibilist, because I don't really see John Calvin or the Bible as doing anything to undercut our agency or responsibility. Okay, and now some of you will say, I'm not a real Calvinist. Well, you can read Richard Mueller's paper, Was Calvin a Calvinist, if you want to dive into that. If you just Google Richard Mueller, Was Calvin a Calvinist? And if I remember, maybe I'll put the link in the notes. And if I don't, put a comment in the comment section, and then I'll drop the link in to get into that little intramural question of Calvinism, which probably most of you don't care about. But Providential Deism says, well, there was planning and intentionality at the beginning, and that has unfolded through time. Okay? Now, I do believe that there was planning and intentionality at the beginning, but I believe that God also, through time, is an agent involved in a living way within human history. That's part of my religious package. Now, this third thing I'm going to call creation with consciousness. And JP has been working his panpsychism to get it in there. And Karen has been wondering about a consciousness field. And we don't know quite how consciousness works. But this is in many ways compatible with theism. Universe began with intention to yield conscious beings whose agency mirrors, in small part, the agency of their creator. Timelines can branch according to the actions of these conscious agents, and the future is open, sort of. Now, I'm not advocating open theism, okay? Because I'm enough of a Calvinist to not advocate for open theism, and I'm enough of a Christian to believe that there will be a historical consummation at some point in time. Now, again, the way I'm talking now, rubbing Adam the wrong way, but sorry, Adam, I just gotta be me. But this second point, that timelines can branch according to the actions of these conscious agents, is the free will that Bret Weinstein wants to continue to assert against Sam Harris. Okay? And this is the free will that most people, well, we all act as if we have it. And when I get into listing the problems with naturalism that I think are really part of what Bret Weinstein is doing, well, this is one of the issues. So part of the question here is whether the universe is opened or closed, whether history is opened or closed. In a closed universe, we have determinism with an illusion of agency. That's Sam Harris's universe. Now, Bret, clearly, if you advocate for a new religion, you probably believe in an open universe where conscious agents determine outcomes, can make consequential choices, and pursue outcomes with reason. This is part of the inconsistency with Sam Harris's admonitions about reason, because he's admonishing people to be reasonable. But only within an open universe does reason make sense, and the admonitions about reason making sense. Because if you ask someone to be reasonable, what you're asking for them is to focus their consciousness, to rein in their actions, to control themselves, to be able to intentionally achieve certain outcomes. This is exactly the aspect that people refer to with Darwin by saying, well, the whole process that has yielded the animal and material and the animal world that we live within today was a closed system, in that, well, it was, well, see, Darwin says there's no agency and there's no employing reason to achieve those outcomes. Now, as I continue to ponder John Vervaeke's relevance realization, we're probably going to have to figure out, where does at least this form of reason fit into it? Is reason a higher form of relevance realization? I think Vervaeke's relevance realization is a really interesting and fascinating idea to throw into this mix, especially with respect to questions about, well, what was Darwin talking about, and whether Darwinism is true or neo-Darwinism, and how this all unfolds today. But basically, in an open system, conscious creatures can employ the spirit of geometry to build bridges that engineers can tell you how long they should last. Now, this got into my Group A and Group B thesis as well, because requirements of an open system, I think, assert that there are two sorts of things in the world. Okay, now we've got JP and his panpsychism. I'm not going to get into this here, but there are two elements that go into making this open system. There's Group A, elements in the universe that are subject to agency, such as my famous cell phone holder. The material was pulled out of the ground and molded and framed with intentionality to achieve the shape of a cell phone stand. The universe is in that sense full of dumb matter with no agency of its own, if panpsychism is wrong. It's something that we colonize, something that we employ to achieve desirable outcomes through reason. Now, JP's panpsychism, particles have limited agency, which can be colonized by higher and greater agencies. And I think that's I think that's an interesting idea. And the idea of agencies being nested is clearly true. Any human being who rides a horse is colonizing the agency of that horse. And the human being who has greater agency is taking advantage of his or her greater agency over the lesser agency of the horse. All right. Now, but then there's Group B, and these are, again, the question is whether Group A and Group B are on a continuum or if they're two separate classes. You have Group B who are agents, and they are the deciders who can employ rationality. These are all the listeners that Sam Harris is admonishing towards being reasonable. The ability to predictably employ the elements of Group A to achieve those desired outcomes. Everyone lives as if they are part of Group B, because if you don't live as if you're part of Group B, you're going to have a meaning crisis, and you might become suicidal and nihilistic. And this is a big element of the meaning crisis, that bit by bit by bit, we are beginning to assume that, or beginning to suspect that, well, if Sam Harris is right, I really don't have agency, and all of his admonitions for my rationality, they're really pretty pointless. Now, this is sort of where Bret comes in, and I really like Bret's work. Somebody early on pointed me out to Bret's appearance on a podcast, Armchair Expert, Shepard, and a number of my listeners listen to his podcast. Dax Shepard, I think his name is. And Bret was on that podcast, and that was just a fun show to listen to. And Bret is bright, but his shtick is that he employs evolutionary psychology. And what this does is he tells us, well, you think you're acting out of free will, but actually it's the decisions and the Darwinian effects from millions of years ago that are acting within you, and you're only acting. You only imagine you're having free will over these aspects of your life, but it's actually your programming that is making you do it. And so I think there would be some value into working with Bret Weinstein and having him articulate more carefully the relationship between this free will, which he says that we have. You can hear that in the question and answer section in the second unbelievable thing, where he says, yes, I believe in free will, and where he just tagged Sam Harris in a tweet saying, I'm going to have to, perhaps we are due another public chat then, Sam Harris. I propose we discuss the status of new atheism. I'd like to explore your thesis on free will and my belief that it is in conflict with the implications of Darwinism. Well, I think that's a good conversation to have, because I'm not clear about what Bret believes. I'm not clear where Bret says the line is between all of this stuff that as a biologist, he says these are the reasons. These are the closed cause and effect reasons why we're doing these things. Now, maybe he says that we're actually free to choose as individuals. Well, I'd like to hear him say that. But I'd also like to hear him account for it. And I would imagine Sam Harris is going to ask him to account for it, because Sam Harris, again, is in the illusory side of this. Do human beings really have agency, or is agency an illusion? Do we not have agency in group when it comes to statistics, but as individuals we have agency? That's kind of a curious thing when we talk about, let's say, the random behavior of nuclear particles. Well, what exactly are we? And in fact, if as a group we just simply show a bell curve, then maybe, again, Sam Harris is right and our individual agency is illusory. So do human beings really have agency, or is agency an illusion? We know that we have some group A-ness within us. I can't help. We are like Group A, and that's so I very much enjoy listening to Bret Weinstein talk about, well, why do people, usually in general, not me, I believe myself an agent, but all those other people out there, they're less agents than I am, surely. All those people are doing things for evolutionary reasons. and I listen to his arguments, I think, that's interesting. Gad Saad. I like listening to some of his arguments too. He's a little bit more dismissive though. I prefer listening to Bret. But, you know, I enjoy hearing those things, and I learn from those things. And I've got some skepticism, but I'm not terribly skeptical about those things. I find those assertions interesting, and I think even productive in terms of helping me understand myself and helping me understand the patterns I see in other human beings. So I'm not discrediting his science, but I don't really know if he's actually thought these issues through. So we know that we have some group A-ness within us, but is our agency completely illusory, and where's the line? Do we know if there is any group B-ness at all? And again, in the second episode of the big conversation where he talks to Alistair McGrath, a woman in the audience asks him, do you believe in free will? I do believe in free will. I should talk to Sam Harris about this. I would listen to that conversation. But now, getting to the point of this video, there are 3 difficulties with naturalism that I want to highlight, and I think are highlighted in Bret's conversation with Alistair McGrath. The first one, how do we account for true agency in a closed naturalist system? If the system is not closed, where is it not closed? How is consciousness, if consciousness is simply an emergent property from the bottom, subject to this long chain of cause and effects, and mental, again, Bret's whole point is that ideas, this second tier of code, ideas are themselves products of evolutionary adaptive forces through time. Adam says that too with, this is what religion is. It's a evolved aspect, okay? How then is that system not closed, just like everything else is closed within the chain of cause and effect? Because if you actually think this thing through, error itself is a fascinating dynamic, because really there can be no error. Because error is a judgment that presumes teleology. Error is a judgment that presumes a better or a worse outcome. There can be no error in Darwinianism. All right? And so, how do we account for true agency in a closed naturalist system? If Reveille's machinery for relevance realization, compatibilism. This is, as people are getting further and further in his conversation, this is where we're getting to, because compatibilism basically says we have a closed system over here, and we're asserting true agency. And that's why, in some ways, my Calvinism is compatibilist, because I can't square election and agency, and I admit I can't square it, so I'm a fudgy compatibilist. But does anybody want to admit to their fudge in this? See, part of the glory of being a fudgy theist is that I can just punt and say, my brain is too small, God knows, and if I can learn it, I'll try, but maybe I can't. But I can trust, perspectival, participatory, knowing in a God. I can trust in his character. That's a feature of theism that affords not only humility, but comfort within not knowing, and comfort within distress and disaster. Agency is an emergent property with consciousness, but if the universe is a closed system of cause and effect of unbreakable natural laws, our mental decisions are a subset of these things, which is, of course, what Bret keeps teaching us. Because of all what the little animals did back when, that got inherited into our brains, and therefore, since our mind is the emanation of our brains, this is the programming. This is also part of the huge problem I have with Bret saying we just transcend our programming. Oh, tell me of this self-transcendence. Again, if you want to look at a physicalist working very hard on these problems. Watch Reveille. He is looking to afford self-transcendence. Well, I don't see Bret doing that hard work. So, Bret, how do you afford self-transcendence when the rest of your shtick is telling us how, well, the reason I'm doing these things is because my animal ancestors did them in the past? And again, I'm not allergic to that line of argumentation, but you're going to have to account for agency at some point, especially if your religion is based on this flippant teleology and really flippant self-transcendence where, well, everything for the last few million years have coded me to do this, but gosh, we're in trouble. I'm just going to transcend my programming. I don't think so. I've been listening to the Hardcore History podcast on the First World War, and there's a great quote in there where Churchill basically notes that the war got away from us. What was that? There was so much killing on each side, we had to punish the other person. We're programmed to do it. And Bret himself has some really awesome lectures out there that notes that when times are good and food is plentiful and nobody's scaring us and we don't feel threatened, well, we can be very generous towards the out group. But if there's anything that we've learned in the last few years, that all you have to, people don't have to be rationally threatened in any real way. Just make them feel threatened through propagandas of fear, and you can push them to do mean and cruel and bloody things. And if there's anything that's clear, not only about clear in terms of the even recent history of human beings, this is how we are. And self-transcendence is not just going to happen because, well, you say Christians in their prayer are doing wishful thinking. Boy, there's a lot of wishful thinking when I listen to Bret with his flippant self-transcendence. Second point, value apart from instrumentality as Group B agents. Now, Sevilla King has her own YouTube channel called Equality Experience, and she did a really terrific conversation with John Vervaeke on this because she was looking into Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance, into the question of, can we have the good? Where does value come from? Now, X is good for blank, but how do we know X is good in itself? That's quality. Bret and Adam want to say that we can choose, being members of Group B, the good. But how do we know it apart from instrumentality? Good for something. This, again, is where the teleology and its naturalism's inability to account for teleology is a huge weakness. Good for survival? Good for happiness? Well, this isn't so easy. There's this famous moment in The Matrix where Cypher wants to be put back into the Matrix. He's seen base reality, or what they think is base reality. They're not sure because in the Matrix it keeps going down. But he's seen base reality and wants back into 1999 to enjoy that steak. And he says, I know this is just coding, but I loves it. Self-evident well-being, thriving, read Brave New World, watch The Matrix. Well, if you plug everyone into a computer and we're all having happy experiences, why would we look at that and say, this is wrong? The whole project of Morpheus and Nebuchadnezzar and Neo to free human beings from the Matrix. This is exactly what that movie is about. That is well-being, our well-being and thriving, really that self-evident? The third problem is human. Now, Bret says, well, what we need to do is we need to somehow have fewer people on the planet. I'm not sure how he's going to get to that. Have fewer people on the planet, a stable population, and maximize well-being as much as we can for those people on the planet. Okay, what's a people? Biologically, Darwinianly. Now, a people, biblically, isn't too hard to come by because the Bible's only 3,000, 2,000 years old. So we kind of know what people are by the Bible. But Darwin can't tell you what a human being is because of the problem of category. Human, just like Finchness, is a variable. And again, if you're not familiar with this, in episodes 0 through 25 and Emerging from the Meaning Crisis, John Vervaeke goes through the philosophy. Episode 26 through 34, he goes through the cognitive science. So Adam doesn't like philosophy, so you might skip 1 through 25. Start at 26 and learn some cognitive science and understand what Darwinianism says. Understand Darwin's insight. Human is a variable in a Darwinian system, not a fixed point. Bret treats it like a fixed point. In fact, the whole history of humanity could be understood through the question about what a human being is. Because naturally, anthropologically, pretty much every tribe begins by saying, me and my family group are people. Anyone outside my family group? Look at Navajo. What's the word for people in Navajo? It's basically us. Look at almost any ancient group. What's a person? Us. You have Greeks and you have barbarians. You have Romans and you have barbarians. You have Jews and you have Gentiles. In almost every people group in the history of the world, it has started this way. Chimps have started this way. You leave the chimp tribe, there's no coming back in. Marriage is an amazing thing in humanity because it's how you make a family member from a non-family member. That's an astounding thing, especially if you're a Darwinian. So human is a variable, a mere variety of life. And there is no inherent goodness in it in Darwinianism. Not a destination, according to Darwin. That's the whole point that Darwin makes. We stumble because of the problem of category. And again, if you don't understand the category problem, watch Vervaeke's stuff. He will explain the category problem to you. Category requires a subjective observer, a definer. The only reason we have, frankly, this idea of human exceptionalism that Bret is banking on in this video is because he recognizes human beings. But what he doesn't recognize is human being is not a scientific category because of the problem of categories. It's not a Darwinian category because of Darwin's observation. Back to the Metaphysical Club. Darwin regretted the word selection. Darwin regretted that the word selection suggested an intention. Remember, it's blind. Natural selection is a blind process because the conditions to which the organism must adapt in order to survive are never the same. In periods of drought, when seeds are hard to find, finches that happen to have a long, narrow beak, good for foraging, will be favored over finches with broad, powerful beaks. More of their offspring will survive and reproduce. In periods of abundance, when seeds are large and their shells are hard, the broad-beaked finches will hold the adaptive advantage. Finchness is a variable, not a constant. Human is a variable, not a constant. Darwin thought that variations do not arise because organisms need them, which is essentially what Lamarck had argued. He thought that variations occur by chance. Remember, the whole point of this is that it's blind. There's no intention. There's no telos. There's no outcome. It's blind. And the whole basis for, I reject supernatural, it's blind. That's the basis here, folks. If you want it this way, you got to own it. In all seasons, it happens that some finches are born with marginally lower or narrower beaks than others, just as children of the same parents are not all exactly the same height. In certain environmental conditions, a narrower beak may have positive or negative survival value. And that will also depend on the context. Realization. Relevance realization is about context. It's the whole thing together. And I'm using Vervaekian hand terminology. Just as children of the same parents are not exactly the same height, in certain environmental conditions, a narrower beak may have positive or negative survival value. But in other conditions, for example, when seeds are plentiful and finches are few, it may make no difference. The selection, in quotation marks, of favorable characteristics is therefore neither designed nor progressive, okay? This is the point that Darwinians keep making. It's not designed. And they forget the second one. Neither is it progressive. There's no value difference between the variations. And there can't be value difference between the variations because there's no intentionality at work within them. There's no engineer looking at the cell phone stand and deciding which one is better than the other. Because we're talking variables without intention and therefore no value. So you can't just sneak in value at the end and say, we need to create a world in which humans are happy and stable. Where are you getting the value from? I don't see it in your system. Now, if you want to just say, I'm a human being and I'm a speciesist, so I'm going to assert it, well, then at least you've just asserted it. But you still have the problem of saying, on what basis is your agency? Well, maybe I've just evolved to assert it. But now we're back in Sam Harris's camp of there being no free will and therefore no need to exhort people to be rational because they can't anyway to the degree that they haven't shown any rationality to begin with, making all of this religion stuff an admonition for religion, again, also moot. The selection of favorable characteristics is therefore neither designed nor progressive. No intelligence, divine or otherwise, determined in advance the relative value of individual variations. There's no value difference between Neanderthal and what we call Homo sapien. There's no value difference between Europeans and Africans, between Africans and Asians, between short people and tall people, between pygmy people and the people in the African, the gods must be crazy people. I can't think of their names. The people group. There's no value differentiation between them. So don't sneak it in terms of your new religion. If you can't account for it, buy your new religion. No intelligence, divine or otherwise, determined in advance the relative value of individual variations. And there is no ideal type of finch or essence of finchness towards which adaptive changes are leading. Now, maybe in our meme world, we like human beings, but that's just as arbitrary. And there's no value that can be had in that system either. So to repeat, 3 difficulties with naturalism, especially with Bret's. How do we account for true agency in a closed naturalist system? 2, flippant teleology, teleology smuggling. What is the source and knowledge of value? 3, what we need to do to survive or thrive? Can we know what we is without the category problem? That's what I see, and I'm sticking with it.